Today, we're going to explore the role of something called the superego in the lives of repeat bar takers. Inspired by the book Better Days by Neil Allen, I want to delve a little bit into the depths of our minds and uncover the real villain that holds us back. It's called the superego. It's not the bar examiners, it's not any of the other external villains that we think are there. Now, don't be worried. We're not going to take a lot of time here, and I'm not going to go into a lot of psychobabble or highly technical material. But let me start by describing what the superego is. Described by Freud, the superego is the nagging voice in our heads that constantly tells us that we're failures. It's the relentless critic that whispers in our ears. It reminds us of our past failures, and it tells us that we're, in this case, incapable of passing the bar exam. In the world of bar takers, the superego takes on an even more malevolent role. It can amplify your doubts and insecurities. It can make you believe that you're stupid or crazy or unworthy of success. It feeds on your fear of failure, and it taunts you with the possibility of humiliation. But here's the catch. The superego is not a real villain. In fact, it's not really even part of our own brain, but instead it's what's called a parasite. It's a physical manifestation of our fears and our insecurities. That's the bad news. The good news is that the superego is a voice that can be silenced if you choose to listen to a different narrative. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do you unravel the power of the superego and learn how to overcome its grip? This is an important, if not critical, piece for what you have to do as you prepare for the bar exam. It's been my experience that if you can challenge the negative self-talk and rewrite your own inner dialogue with the superego, you can prove the superego wrong, and you can have the peace and the quiet and the confidence to do well on the bar exam. I want to give you three distinct things that as a bar taker you can do to silence your superego. Here's the first. Confront the voice. In my experience, the superego is in fact a manifestation, and it's got a face, it's got a presence, and if you get into a Gestalt dialogue with it, you will discover that that voice in your head really does have a manifested physicality to it. As you start to confront the voice or the superego, you begin by telling it that you are no longer a child, and you don't need the constant badgering and belittling. In fact, for the remainder of your study time, and perhaps for the remainder of your life, you want the superego to stand down and to be quiet. Tell the superego that you can handle this. Now, it's typically a requirement to take several conversations, if you will, to reach this agreement, but you can and will prevail. When your superego bites back, or it sneers, or it pouts, or it shrugs its shoulders at your request, be insistent and be firm. It's not enough to just get a whatever from the superego. You must receive a positive affirmation that it will stand aside. And the way that this dialogue goes is basically to say, listen, superego, I appreciate that you saved my life when I was young, but today I'm an adult and I don't need you telling me that I'm incapable or stupid or unable to pass the bar. Can you stand aside and let me control my own life and my own studies? And you'll have to ask this question typically multiple times, but don't accept anything less than a positive statement from the superego that it will, in fact, stand aside. Keep asking until you get it, and you will get it. Remember that you have the right and the power to make this happen, but you may be reluctant to assert yourself because the superego is a bully, and it's been bullying you all your life. So remember that this is your life, your studies, and the superego is not in charge. You are. So insist that you can control your life and tell the superego and get an agreement that it will, in fact, be quiet. Now, the second step in this process is to acknowledge that the superego and its voice has been telling you lies. These lies started when we were all young, and they were created to keep us safe as children in the world of adults. But here's the reality. You're no longer a child, and the stories that the superego tells you today are simply no longer true for you as a grown adult. So what you want to do here is affirm to yourself, and you want to tell your superego that you're in fact quite capable and you're able to pass the bar exam. The superego's attempt to control you by lying to you about your abilities is not acceptable any longer. That's a lie. And it's perfectly acceptable to tell your superego that when you hear that you're not capable, you're not able, you need me, remind the superego that they were the ones in charge when you failed. So, in fact, they have no right to control you now, and that the stories that they're telling you are lies. Be clear, be firm in that discussion with your superego. You don't believe the lies that you're being told about your ability or your talent to pass the bar exam. Remind the superego that you got all the way through school, all the way through law school, maybe you even were licensed somewhere else, and you are capable of completing the task of passing the bar exam. When you confront the superego with that truth, it is unable to respond, and it will basically shrug its shoulders or give you a look. And then you again go back to step one and you say, will you step down? Will you stand away and let me control my own life? Don't accept anything less than a positive affirmation of that, and don't believe the lies that the superego tells you. And then step three is that you need to start listening to your softer inner voice. The superego is so loud and so aggressive that it's often the only voice that we hear. But once you get the superego to stand down and be quiet, you will begin to notice another voice. Now, this voice is the one that's quietly telling you the truth about who you are, about what you've accomplished, and what you're capable of doing. The reality is that this voice speaks softly, and it's hard to hear it because the superego is constantly there badgering and telling you what you're doing wrong. But when the superego stands down, you'll begin to hear this other voice. And then you need to honor this softer voice. You need to listen to it and be aware of it. Because when you do that, this voice grows louder and more confident, and it will reinforce your belief that you can succeed. By creating the room to hear this softer voice, and then by honoring what it's telling you, what you'll discover is you sleep better, you study with greater peace and calmness, you have greater clarity in the work that you're doing, and you don't have this nagging, belittling voice telling you that you're not enough. It'll make a huge difference in your study and on your exam days. Now, ultimately, taming the superego, telling it to stand aside, getting it agreement to step away, is as important as any rule of law that you can learn. Taking a few minutes every day to be clear with your superego that they are no longer in charge of your life, that they are a parasite, and that you are in control is one of the best ways that you can spend your time leading up to the exam. Make it a daily event in which you have this conversation with your superego until you have completely reached a point at which the superego is no longer talking to you, belittling you, bringing you down, and discouraging you. As that happens, this quieter voice will take over, and it will give you the calmness and the clarity and the peace that you deserve. I hope that's helpful to you. Look forward to you having a good conversation with your superego and putting it in its rightful place.